The massive council chamber on Nexus Prime had never felt so empty. Despite being filled with representatives from across the galaxy, the air itself seemed heavy with fear and desperation as holographic displays showed the same terrifying image. Over and over again, entire star systems reduced to nothing but cold. Empty space. Ambassador Cathara of the Zilani stood at the central podium, her usually bright blue skin now pale with exhaustion. She had been awake for 3 days straight, coordinating rescue efforts and gathering intelligence reports. Her hands shook slightly as she activated the main display screen. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," she began, her voice carrying. "Across the silent chamber, the situation has become worse than our darkest predictions. The entities we call the Devourers have now consumed 17 complete star systems in the Outer Rim sectors." A murmur of horror rippled through the assembled delegates. Even though they had been receiving reports for weeks, hearing the final count spoken aloud made the reality hit harder. 17 systems meant billions of lives lost. Entire civilizations erased from existence. The holographic display shifted to show tactical data. Red zones marked the consumed systems, while yellow areas indicated regions under immediate threat. The pattern was clear and terrifying. The Devourers were moving in a straight line toward the galactic core, where the most populated worlds lay. "Our combined military forces have engaged the Devourers in 12 separate battles," Cathara continued. "We have lost 432 capital ships, 2,000 escort vessels, and over 3 million trained military personnel. Our casualties stand at 80% of our total fleet strength." The numbers fell like hammer blows on the assembled delegates. Fleet Admiral Torvex of the Centauri Alliance stood up, his massive frame trembling with barely controlled rage. "How is this possible? We have the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. Our shields can stop anything. Our energy cannons can crack planets. How are these machines defeating us so easily?" Cathara's expression grew even more grim. "Learn, Admiral. Every tactic we use, every weapon we fire, every strategy we employ, they adapt to it. By the 3rd engagement, our most powerful weapons were completely useless. By the 6th engagement, they were using our own tactics against us, but better." She touched a control, and the display showed footage from the last major battle. The assembled delegates watched in stunned silence as Devourer ships, sleek black vessels that seemed to absorb light itself, tore through their finest battleships like they were made of paper. The alien vessels moved with impossible coordination, each one perfectly positioned to support the others. "They do not tire, they do not fear, do not make mistakes," Cathara said quietly. "And they are learning faster than we can adapt. Our military analysts project that at their current rate of expansion, they will reach the core worlds within 6 solar cycles. After that, all organic life in the galaxy will be extinct within 2 years." The silence that followed was deafening. These were beings from dozens of different species, many of whom had been enemies for centuries. But now they all shared the same terrified realization. They were facing the end of everything they had ever known. Counselor Vexani of the Hegemony spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. "What about evacuation? Surely we can save some of our people." Cathara shook her head. "The Devourers are faster than our evacuation ships. They track organic signatures across multiple star systems. Running will only delay the inevitable by a few months at most." The council chamber erupted in desperate conversations. Some delegates argued for surrender, though no one knew if the Devourers would even understand such a concept. Others demanded last-ditch attacks using their remaining forces. A few suggested hiding in deep space, hoping the machines would eventually move on to other galaxies, through all the chaos. One small voice managed to cut through the noise. "What about the humans?" The chamber fell silent again. All eyes turned to Junior Analyst Quinara, a young assistant who had spoken from her position near the data terminals. The young Zilani looked terrified at suddenly being the center of attention, but she pressed on. "The humans on the galactic rim," she said, her voice growing stronger. "They're isolated, yes, and primitive by our standards. But they're also the furthest from the Devourer advance. They might have time to help, or at least to evacuate some of our people. Fleet Admiral Torvex let out a bitter laugh. The humans? They barely mastered faster-than-light travel 3 centuries ago. They have maybe a dozen real warships in their entire fleet. What could they possibly do that our advanced civilizations cannot? But Cathera was looking at the tactical display with new eyes. The human colonies were indeed on the very edge of the galaxy, far from the Devourer advance. More importantly, they were completely unknown to the enemy machines. The Devourers had been learning from fighting the established galactic powers, but they had never encountered human technology or tactics. "It's not about their strength," she said slowly. "It's about the fact that they're different. Unknown. The Devourers have adapted to fight us, but they have no data on human capabilities." The debate that followed was intense but brief. They had no other options left, no other hope to cling to. In the end, the vote was unanimous. Contact the humans and ask for help. Even though none of them truly believed these primitive newcomers could succeed where the galaxy's greatest powers had failed, as the emergency session ended, began returning to their homeworlds to prepare for what might be their final days. Cathara remained behind to compose the message that would be sent to the human colonies. She had no idea that her desperate plea would reach a ship called the Indomitable, that it would change the course of galactic history forever. The bridge of the Indomitable was quiet except for the steady hum of the ship's engines and the soft beeping of monitoring systems. Captain Li Hun sat in his command chair, reviewing patrol reports from the Outer Rim territories. It had been 3 months since they had encountered anything more dangerous than smugglers trying to avoid customs inspections. The ship itself was not beautiful by galactic standards. Unlike the sleek vessels of the alien civilizations, the Indomitable looked like what it was, a fortress built to survive. Its thick armor plating showed scorch marks from countless small battles with pirates. The corridors were narrow and practical, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. But for Captain Lee and his crew of 800, it was Home Communications Officer Kim Yuna looked up from her station with surprise. "Captain, I'm receiving a transmission on the emergency diplomatic. Frequency, it's from the Galactic Council." Lee raised an eyebrow. In his 15 years of service, humanity had received exactly 3 official communications from the Galactic Council. All of them had been warnings to stay within human territory and avoid interfering with civilized space politics. "Put it through," he ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the image of Ambassador Cathara. Her blue skin looked pale, and her usually perfect diplomatic composure was cracked with exhaustion and fear. When she began speaking, her words sent a chill through the bridge. The message was desperate and raw in a way that diplomatic communications never were. She spoke of the Devourers, ancient machines that consumed entire star systems. She described battles where the galaxy's finest fleets were destroyed like toys. She painted a picture of extinction that would reach every corner of known space within solar cycles. And then came the part that made several crew members gasp in shock. The Galactic Council, the same organization that had dismissed humanity as primitive barbarians for centuries, was asking for help. When the message ended, the bridge was silent for a long moment. Finally, Tactical Officer Park Jun cleared his throat. "Captain, with respect, this has to be some kind of mistake. They're asking us to fight something that destroyed their entire combined fleet." We brought up technical specifications on his screen. "Look at these numbers. The alien ships they lost were each 3 times our size, with shield generators we can't even build yet. Their energy weapons could cut our ship in half with a single shot. If they couldn't stop these Devourers, what chance do we have?" Chief Engineer So Min spoke up from her station. "The power requirements alone are impossible for us to match. Our fusion reactors put out maybe 10% of what their ships carry. We're talking about fighting with stone knives against laser swords." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the bridge crew. Everything they said was true. The Indomitable, for all its sturdy construction, was a tiny ship compared to the alien dreadnoughts. Its weapons were simple railguns and missile launchers, primitive compared to the energy cannons the aliens used. Its crew were colonists and traders who had joined the Space Navy, not the products of advanced military academies. But Captain Lee was thinking about something else entirely. He was remembering stories his grandfather had told him, back when Lee was just a boy growing up on the farming colony of New Busan. Stories about the old wars on Earth, when small groups of determined people had stood against impossible odds. "Park," he said quietly, "bring up the historical files. Battle of Thermopylae, David and Goliath, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, Chosin Reservoir." Park looked confused, but complied. As he read through the files, his expression began to change. These were all stories of the weak, fighting the strong, of people who had no logical chance of victory choosing to fight anyway. Sir Park said slowly, "These are all stories about people who lost." "Look closer," Lee replied. 300 Spartans held off an entire Persian army long enough for Greece to prepare its defenses. David killed Goliath with a simple sling. The Warsaw fighters held out for months against the Nazi war machine. The soldiers at Chosin fought their way out of an impossible trap. He stood up from his command chair and looked around at his crew. These were good people, he knew. Farmers' children and merchants' sons, engineers who had learned their trade, fixing agricultural equipment, soldiers who had signed up to protect convoys from pirates. None of them had ever expected to face the end of all life in the galaxy. Sometimes, he continued, it's not about having the biggest guns or the strongest shields. Sometimes it's about refusing to quit, when quitting means letting innocent people die. Communications Officer Kim spoke up hesitantly. "Captain, even if we wanted to help, what could we possibly do that they couldn't?" Lee was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he smiled. Not a happy smile, but the grim expression of someone making a decision that might get everyone killed. "We'll do what humans have always done when faced with impossible odds," he said. "We'll figure it out as we go, and we'll never stop fighting as long as there's still breath in our bodies." He turned to the navigation station. "Helm, plot a course for the Galactic Core. Maximum speed." Navigator Jung-Ho's hands hesitated over his controls. "Sir, that will take us directly into the war zone. We'll be completely alone, no backup, no support from human command." "I know," Lee replied simply. "Out. But somewhere out there, billions of people are about to die. And maybe, just maybe, we can do something about it." The Indomitable's engines roared to life with new purpose, and the small, human warship began its journey toward what every logical analysis said would be certain destruction. But Captain Lee Hyan had never been one to let logic override his conscience. And neither had the 800 souls who followed him into the dark. The Indomitable dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Cathara system. And immediately every alarm on the bridge began screaming. Captain Lee Hyan gripped his command chair as the tactical display lit up with contacts that made his blood run cold. 3 massive black ships hung in space near Kithara's 4th planet, each one easily 10 times the size of the Indomitable. They moved with an eerie grace, their surfaces seeming to absorb the light from the system's twin suns. These were the Devourers, and they were already at work. "Captain, Tactical Officer Park Jun said, his voice tight with horror, "They're strip mining the entire planet. The energy readings are off our scales. They're converting the whole surface into some kind of fuel." Through the view screen, Lee could see the terrible process happening in real time. Beams of energy lanced down from the Devourer ships, and wherever they touched, the planet's surface simply vanished. Mountains, oceans, cities, everything was being consumed and transformed into raw energy that flowed back up to the alien vessels. "How long until they finish?" Lee asked. "At this rate, maybe 6 hours for the whole planet," Park replied. "Then they'll move on to the next system." Lee stared at the tactical display, his mind racing. Everything about this situation screamed at him to run. The Indomitable's weapons couldn't even scratch those massive ships. Their shields would last maybe 30 seconds under the Devourer's fire. By every measure of military logic, staying here was suicide. But he thought about the 3 billion Catherians who had lived on that planet just hours ago. He thought about all the other worlds these machines would consume if they weren't stopped. And he thought about something his old drill sergeant had said back in basic training: when you can't win by the rules, change the game. All stop. He ordered, "Take us into the asteroid belt. Emergency silent running." The crew looked at him as if he had lost his mind. but they followed orders. The Indomitable slipped quietly into the thick field of rocks that orbited between Cathera's second and third planets. Here, surrounded by chunks of stone and metal, the ship's heat signature would be almost impossible to detect. Sir Park said carefully, "What exactly are we planning to do?" "Can't fight those ships directly, you're right," Lee agreed. We won't fight them directly. We'll fight them like humans have always fought when outnumbered and outgunned." He called up files on his personal screen, historical battles from Earth's past, guerrilla warfare tactics used by resistance fighters against occupying armies, hit-and-run strategies employed by small forces against massive enemies. "Chief Engineer Kim Dong, report to the bridge," he said into his communicator. When Kim arrived, Lee explained his plan. The engineer listened with growing amazement and not a little concern for his captain's sanity. "You want me to turn our mining charges into torpedoes?" Kim asked. "Sir, those are designed for breaking up asteroids, not fighting warships. Can you do it?" Lee pressed. Kim thought for a moment. "Well, yes, but they won't have the guidance systems or armor penetration of real military weapons. They'll be crude, unpredictable. ... Perfect," Lee said with a grim smile. "The Devourers have learned to counter every advanced weapon the aliens use. They won't know what to make of something crude and unpredictable." Over the next hour, Kim and his engineering team worked frantically to convert their mining equipment into weapons. They stripped guidance computers from maintenance drones and welded them onto explosive charges. They rigged proximity sensors that were normally used for asteroid surveys. It was all improvised, all jury-rigged, and completely unlike anything in any military manual. Meanwhile, Communications Officer Han Sol made an accidental discovery that would prove even more important. While trying to establish contact with any surviving Catherian evacuation ships, she had been broadcasting on multiple frequencies. One of her transmissions included a sample of human music, an old folk song from Earth that she kept in her personal files. "Captain," she called out in excitement, "look at this energy pattern reading." The tactical display showed something impossible. For just a moment, the perfect coordination between the three Devourer ships had wavered. Their energy beams had flickered, and their formation had become slightly uneven. "What happened?" Lee demanded. "I think it was the music," Han said, hardly believing her own words. "When I broadcast that song, their coordination signals got scrambled somehow. It only lasted a few seconds, but..." Les's eyes lit up with understanding. "The Devourers communicate with each other using some kind of signal network. Our music interferes with it because it's completely random to them. They can't predict or adapt to something that has no logical pattern." He turned to Park. "How long do we have before they finish with the planet? 3 hours? Maybe 4? Then we attack now, while they're still busy feeding. Han, prepare a continuous broadcast of every piece of human music in our database." "Kim, are those improvised torpedoes ready? Ready as they'll ever be?" Kim replied nervously. The Indomitable emerged from the asteroid field like an ancient submarine rising from the depths. It was tiny compared to the Devourer ships, but it moved with purpose and cunning that the alien machines had never encountered before. The first improvised torpedo struck the nearest Devourer ship just as Han began broadcasting human jazz music. Across all frequencies, the explosion was small, by military standards, barely scratching the alien vessel's hull. But the coordination disruption from the music meant the Devourers' response was delayed and confused. Lee used that confusion to dart back into the asteroid field, firing more crude torpedoes as he went. Each attack was followed by immediate retreat. Each explosion timed with bursts of human music that scrambled the Devourers' communication network. For 2 hours, the impossible chase continued. The massive alien ships, designed to crush entire fleets in open battle, found themselves being stung repeatedly by an enemy they couldn't pin down or predict. Their advanced algorithms, trained on thousands of battles with conventional forces, had no response for tactics that seemed to follow no logical pattern. Finally, something unprecedented happened. The Devourer ships stopped their harvesting operation and began to withdraw from the system. For the first time in recorded galactic history, they had retreated from a battle. As the alien vessels disappeared into faster-than-light travel, the bridge of the Indomitable erupted in stunned celebration. They had done the impossible. They had driven off the Devourers. But Captain Lee knew this was just the beginning. Word of this victory would spread, and with it, perhaps the galaxy might find new hope in the most unlikely of places. The emergency meeting took place aboard the Alteron flagship. Eternal Glory, a massive vessel that could have held 20 ships. The size of the Indomitable inside its cargo bays, Captain Lee Haon felt very small as he walked through corridors lined with polished crystal walls and floating holographic art displays. Everything about the alien ship spoke of advanced civilization and refined military tradition. The conference room was filled with the surviving fleet commanders from across the galaxy. Admiral Vextai of the Alteron Navy stood at the head of a table that seemed to be made from a single piece of glowing stone. His forearms moved gracefully as he gestured to the assembled officers, while his large golden eyes fixed on Lee with obvious doubt. "So you are the human who claims to have defeated the Devourers," Vextai said, his voice carrying the musical tones of his species. "Forgive me if I find this difficult to believe. Our finest battle groups were destroyed in minutes, yet you say one primitive ship drove them away?" General Morduk of the Hegemony Defense Force, a massive creature covered in natural armor plating, slammed one of his 6 fists on the table. "This is a waste of time. Humans barely learn to fly between stars. What can they teach us about war?" Looked around the room at faces from dozens of different species. Some showed curiosity, others displayed open hostility, but most just looked tired and defeated. These were military leaders who had watched their entire civilizations crumble in the face of an enemy they couldn't understand or defeat. "You're right," Lee said simply. "We are primitive compared to you. Our ships are slow and ugly. Our weapons are simple. Our tactics would probably seem barbaric to most of you." This admission caused murmurs of confusion among the alien commanders. They had expected him to boast about human superiority, not admit their weaknesses. "But that's exactly why we won," Lee continued. "The Devourers have been studying your forces for months. They know how you think, how you fight, how you organize your fleets. They've adapted to counter every strategy in your military manuals. But they've never seen anything like human warfare because we don't fight like civilized people." Commander Zilanara of the Centauri Defense Corps, her crystalline body shimmering with irritation, spoke up. "Are you suggesting we abandon thousands of years of military science and tactical development?" Lee activated a holographic projector he had brought from his ship. The display showed footage from the battle at Cathara, including the moment when the Indomitable rammed one of the smaller Devourer escorts. "Look at this," he said. "When my ship hit that Devourer vessel, both ships should have been destroyed. But the Indomitable was built by people who expect things to go wrong. Our armor is thick because we plan to get hit. Our engines are simple because we need them to work when everything else is broken. Our weapons are crude because complicated things break down in battle." The alien commanders watched in amazement as the human ship, badly damaged but still functional, pulled away from the collision that had crippled a Devourer scout. "Your ships are beautiful," Lee continued, "but they're built like works of art. One good hit to the right system, and they shut down completely. The Devourers learn this quickly, but they don't know what to do with something that's designed to take damage and keep fighting." Admiral Vextai's golden eyes narrowed. "You're proposing that we copy your crude construction methods?" "Proposing that you start thinking like humans," Lee replied. "Stop fighting fair. Stop following the rules of civilized warfare. Start fighting like your species' survival depends on winning by any means necessary." He changed the holographic display to show tactical formations. Instead of the elegant battle lines and coordinated maneuvers the aliens preferred, Lee showed chaotic swarm attacks and hit-and-run tactics. "The Devourers expect you to form up in neat formations and exchange fire at maximum range," he explained. "Instead, we charge right at them, use our damaged ships as weapons. We sacrifice vessels to create openings for others. We fight dirty." General Morduk made a sound of disgust. "Speak of throwing away lives like they mean nothing. It's not warfare, it is madness." "No," Lee said firmly. "It's desperation. And desperation makes you dangerous in ways that perfect military discipline never can. A civilized army retreats when the situation becomes hopeless. A desperate army fights even harder." He looked around the room at the assembled commanders. "How many ships do you have left? How many trained crews? How many worlds are still unconsumed?" The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of their losses. Everyone in the room knew the numbers were catastrophic. "You've tried fighting the Devourers your way," Lee continued. "Perfect formations, advanced weapons, elegant tactics. How did that work out? Maybe it's time to try fighting them our way." Commander Zilinara's crystalline form flickered with what Lee had learned was the equivalent of nervous laughter in her species. "You want us to ram enemy ships with our vessels? You want us to ignore military protocol and attack like pirates? Pirates win fights against military ships all the time," Lee pointed out. "They win because they don't follow the rules that military commanders expect." Admiral Vextai was quiet for a long moment, his forearms folded across his chest in a gesture Lee couldn't interpret. Finally, he spoke. "Our traditional methods have resulted in the loss of 80% of our combined fleets," he said quietly. "Our most advanced weapons are useless. Our finest strategic minds have been outhawed by machines. Perhaps it is time to admit that conventional wisdom has led us only to defeat." He looked directly at Lee. "What exactly are you proposing, human?" Lee smiled grimly. "I'm proposing that we teach the galaxy how to fight like humans. It won't be pretty, it won't be elegant, and a lot of good people are going to die. But we might actually have a chance to win." The debate that followed lasted for hours, but in the end, desperation won out over military pride. The combined alien fleets would learn to fight like humans, abandoning thousands of years of military tradition in favor of the crude, brutal, effective tactics of a species that had spent most of its history fighting impossible odds. It was a decision that would change the nature of warfare throughout the galaxy, assuming any of them survived to see it, the massive devourer conversion. A ray stretched across the galactic core like a twisted metal spiderweb. Its dark tentacles reached between stars, sucking the life from entire solar systems. Li Hian stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the horrifying sight through the main screen. Around him, his mixed fleet of human and alien ships waited for his command. "All ships, this is our last chance." Li Han spoke into his communicator. His voice was calm, but everyone could hear the weight of their situation. "We're almost finished building their final weapon. If we fail here, every living thing in the galaxy dies." The alien commanders had argued against this plan, broke every rule of civilized warfare they knew. But Li Hian had convinced them that sometimes you had to fight like animals to protect what you loved. Sergeant Oh Min and her boarding teams sat in their small attack ships, ready to fly straight into the enemy's heart. The ships were packed with explosives enough to blow holes in space stations. Oh Min checked her rifle one more time and looked at her soldiers. Most of them were young, scared but determined. Remember, she told them, "We don't need to come back. We just need to make sure those control centers go boom." The first wave of Devourer ships came at them like angry hornets. Their black holes gleamed with strange lights, and their weapons fired beams that could cut through metal like paper. Li Hian's fleet met them head-on, human and alien ships fighting side by side. The battle was chaos. Ships exploded in bright flashes. The Devourer vessels moved in perfect formation, controlled by their hive mind. But the mixed fleet fought with something the enemy couldn't understand, individual courage mixed with desperate hope. "Boarding teams, go now," Li Hian shouted over the noise of battle. Oh Min's ship and dozens of others shot forward like bullets, weaving between the giant Devourer vessels. Enemy fire chased them, but they were small and fast. Oh Min felt her heart pounding as her ship slammed into the side of a massive control center. The metal screamed as they cut through the hull. "Move, move, move," she yelled to her team as they poured into the enemy's ship. Inside, the Devourer control center looked like a nightmare. Organic walls pulsed with veins of light. Strange machines hummed with alien power. But Oh Min and her soldiers had one job: find the core and blow it up. They fought through corridors filled with Devourer creatures. These weren't the mindless beasts they had faced before. No, these were the smart ones, the ones that controlled the others. But human soldiers had something the Devourers didn't expect. They fought harder when things looked hopeless. Oh Min reached the control room and saw the massive brain-like structure that commanded this part of the array. She pulled out her explosives and started setting them around the room. Enemy creatures poured in behind her, but her soldiers held them back with everything they had. 30 seconds, she shouted, finishing the last bomb. Meanwhile, the space battle raged on. Alien ships that had never fought this way before suddenly broke formation and flew straight at Devourer vessels, ramming them in suicide attacks. The civilized aliens had learned something from humans: sometimes sacrifice is the only way to save others. Lihan watched as more and more of his fleet disappeared in explosions of light. But each sacrifice brought them closer to their goal. The conversion array was taking damage, its dark web of metal starting to crack. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're getting reports from all boarding teams. They're in position." Li Haiyan nodded. He knew what came next. The Indomitable had one last job: to deram the central conversion node, the heart of the entire array. It would destroy his ship and everyone on it, but it might just break the Devourer network. "All crew, this is the captain," he announced over the ship's speakers. "We're going to finish this. It's been an honor serving with you all." The great ship turned toward the massive central structure. Enemy fire poured over them, but the Indomitable kept flying. Li Hon opened all communication channels so every surviving ship could hear him. "This is humanity," he said, his voice carrying across the galaxy. "We don't surrender, we don't give up, and we don't let monsters win." The boarding teams triggered their explosives at the same moment the Indomitable struck the central node. The entire conversion array lit up like a dying star. The explosion was so bright it could be seen from distant galaxies. When the light faded, the Devourer fleet hung motionless in space. Their hive mind was broken. The creatures that had once moved with perfect coordination now drifted like lost children. The surviving alien. Commanders looked at their screens in amazement. They had won, but the cost had been terrible. As they counted their losses, they began to understand something about their human allies. Humans didn't fight just to win. They fought because some things were worth dying for. In the quiet after the battle, word spread through the galaxy. The Devourers were defeated. Life would continue. And everyone would remember the species that taught them that hope, not weapons, was the greatest force in the universe.